Good morning, brothers and sisters. Just another brief video about the reading from the Epistle to the Romans today. Um, uh, Hopefully, some of this is sinking in. We seem to be reading a lot of the same ideas again and again. This time, St. Paul really tries to bring all of the things he's been saying so far home and unite them with one more example. So he begins by saying that there's nothing completely rejected, that God has not in any way completely rejected the Jews, reminding the readers he is a Jew himself, um, and that he desires for all of Israel to be saved. And then it gives basically this example of the chosenness of the Jewish people and their response to the coming of Christ as an extended confirmation of the things that he's said so far. So God uh, does things that seem to be strange, and yet there is an overall larger plan going on. So in this case, God chose the Jewish people as the people to give the message to about the coming of Christ, about the coming of the Messiah, and He did that with complete foreknowledge of how they would respond. So again, even though He knew that as a entire nation, as a group of people, they would reject Christ and they would prefer to live in the Old Testament version of things. And all the same, even though he knew that that's how things would come out, he did not make it so that they did those choices, but he knew that that would happen. All the same, he gave them the law, he gave them the prophets, so that it would be useful to at least some of them. And St. Paul is giving himself as an example of someone that finally did come around and realize that what he had been brought up with was fulfilled in the coming of Christ. Um, and then at the same time, um, after the coming of Christ, God brings the Gentiles into his church. So it seems also at the very beginning, maybe unfair that God had had just one group of people as chosen people, but now we see that is undone later on. We see even at the time when there was only one nation that was considered God's chosen people. From the very beginning of the book of Romans, St. Paul has said everyone else did have their conscience. There were revelations. There were revelations, for example, to the Egyptians that there was something special about the Hebrew people, about the God they believed in. There were many opportunities, even outside of God's chosen people. And then all of this again, when it just seems so strange to our minds. Well, why bother with the Jewish people at all? Why did any of this initially have to happen? And then it looks like God has been harsh. It looks like God has been unjust. And then St. Paul says, for example, that so again he quotes Isaiah that says that um, God has given them a spirit of slumber, eyes that they should not see, and ears that they should not hear. So again, it sounds like God Himself is preventing the Jews as a people from accepting Him. And again, that's He knew how they would respond. And then the twist in it is at the end, St. Paul says that by bringing the Gentiles into the church, God has aroused up jealousy among the Jews. And what he means by this is now that they see that someone else is being allowed into their inheritance, there's the hope that they will investigate a little bit further, a hope that they will find out a little bit more about Christ, about that he does match the prophecies about the Messiah, and therefore it's come sort of full circle again by seeing another group of people, the Christian Church, claim that they are now the people of God. That can be useful. Of course, some people will just be offended by that. Some people will get angry and will get offended. Some people might want to take a second look then and say, well, maybe something has changed. Maybe the law that we had pointed in this direction, maybe that the prophets pointed in this direction. And again, all of this this all has to do with the history of the church. This has to do with the history of, again, God first revealing himself to Israel and being having them as his chosen people, and then the opening of the church up to the Gentiles after the coming of Christ. But as history proceeds, we can always take a lesson from this. We can see um, we in the church want to think of ourselves now as God's chosen people, and we are. I mean, we see now in the New Testament that everyone is loved by God. Everyone is chosen by God for some purpose. But it's very easy for us to do the same thing, to become too set in our ways, to become too dependent upon ourselves, too sure of ourselves that just by being in the right place, everything will be all right. And then we see sometimes we see newcomers to the faith, and we think automatically we're better than them, or that we should understand that if we're feeling that offense towards newcomers, towards someone else in the church, then just like it says here, the Gentiles coming into the church arouse jealousy in the Jews, and St. Paul welcomes that. Not that it's a bad thing, but that it's a good thing, because they will look, hopefully, at themselves and change. And we can do the same thing when we see ourselves reacting to things with jealousy. If we feel that we are being left behind, we should look and see if that's really the case, or if we have closed the door ourselves and need to do what it takes to get that door back open. We will continue, God willing, tomorrow.